The development of technology and the whole humanity was supported by the desire to explore the whole world and all the unknown. Humanity was even able to start exploring the expanses of space. Attempts were made to fly into space, which mostly ended in success. People didn't see any shortcomings and considered the safety of their rockets to be impeccable. Even space shuttles were built to transport 7 astronauts simultaneously, but the illusion before people's eyes collapsed in 1986 with the destruction of the Challenger shuttle, the most progressive shuttle in the world. But today we will talk with you about an equally horrific tragedy that turned the whole world of cosmonautics upside down, namely the Columbia shuttle disaster. My fellow Americans, this day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the Mission Control Center in Houston lost contact with our space shuttle Columbia. Shortly after, debris was seen falling in the sky over Texas. Columbia is lost. There are no survivors. George Bush. These words of American President George Bush have horrified American society. The oldest American shuttle, Columbia, which was the pride and joy of cosmonautics, crashed to pieces on February 1, 2003, taking 7 astronauts with it. But what happened with spacecraft to collapse upon entering the atmosphere? Was there really no way to save the ship? My name is Kalambekov Balbek, and today we will try to figure it out. Enjoy your viewing. Space Shuttle Columbia is the first spacecraft that was sent into space from the Space Transportation System line. At one time, it was awarded the title of the Pride of Cosmonautics and was the heaviest shuttle. A distinctive feature of the last 28th fatal flight of Columbia STS-107 was that the shuttle flew in the free flight and didn't try to grapple with the International Space Station. Due to the fact that Columbia was the heavy shuttle, it wasn't suitable for transporting cargo to the docking orbit. That's why it was awarded for carrying out 80 different experiments in the field of space physics, medicine, and biology. Additionally, there were 7 astronauts on the ship as well as on the Challenger shuttle, which exploded immediately after launch in 1986. In the crew were Commander Richard Husband, pilot William McCool, as well as specialists Michael Anderson, David Brown, Laurel Clark, Ilan Ramon, and Kalpana Chawla. The last 2 people were the first astronauts from their nations, Ramon from Israel, Chawla from India. All 7 astronauts were killed. It should be noted that the start itself looked flawless. However, the next day, experts saw through the cameras how at 81 seconds a fragment of foam insulation weighing just over a kilogram falls off from the external fuel tank and crashes into the thermal insulation panel of the left wing. This case wasn't paid enough attention, but this case became fatal, as it turned out during the experiment after the disaster when a piece of foam insulation was fired from a cannon at a speed of 800 km per hour. A 40-centimeter hole appeared on the shuttle material. However, at that time the management couldn't even assume this because such cases happened in the past and those launches were successful. Therefore, this incident was recognized as normal and didn't pay due attention. The astronauts themselves were informed only on January 23 with the help of a letter in which Flight Director Steve Stitch informed the astronauts about the damage to the thermal insulation layer, but instantly dispelled their worries about returning to Earth and reported this solely so that the astronauts wouldn't be surprised by journalists' questions. This item is not even worth mentioning other than wanting to make sure that you are not surprised by it in a question from a reporter. We have seen the same phenomenon on several other flights and there is absolutely no concern for entry. In any case, the astronauts would not have had the opportunity to correct the destruction due to the lack of spacesuits for going into space, materials for repairing the hull, and the lack of manipulator that would help to check the breakdown by turning the ship. Attempts to inspect the damage done to the shuttle from the observatory were not even accepted, and worse, the view from the ship didn't show its own bottom. The only possible way to save the astronauts would be to speed up the dispatch of the second shuttle, Atlantis. His flight was scheduled for February 11, but missing some preparation measures, it would be possible to send Atlantis and with the help of a cable and 2 spacecrafts pull out all the astronauts in turn, but this method remains hypothetical. All that the Columbia shuttle disaster faced was the NASA leadership that didn't believe in the origin of this accident, and if they had presented at least a little threat of the development of catastrophic events, perhaps everything would have turned out differently. Instead, was simply ignored. The first signs of malfunctions appeared immediately upon entering the atmosphere on February 1 over California. When the shuttle was still rushing through the dark, deep sky, astronomers from the California Institute of Technology noticed how some parts of the shuttle were falling off in the form of large flashes. At the same moment, the first signal came to Houston about an abnormal increase in temperature in the left chassis. Then, at 8:52 a.m., four sensors failed, but before that, they showed that the temperature had risen by 30 degrees, 4 times higher than normal in the zone. After that, Houston asked about the position of the ship, and at that moment, when Rick Hasman began to respond, the connection was cut off, and the astronauts were no longer heard. A few minutes later, American TV channels were already broadcasting live showing the destruction of the shuttle. An alarm was announced in the flight control center. Despite the shock that gripped everyone, post-construction work immediately began. The wreckage of the shuttle stretched in length from 50 kilometers of West Texas to 400 kilometers, reaching the state of Louisiana. For several days, any flights were banned, because after the crash of the shuttle, a cloud containing metal dust and fragments hung in the sky. At the same time, NASA categorically forbade approaching the wreckage, as they are highly toxic. In this regard, FBI were involved. During the first hours, search were conducted for the bodies of astronauts, but there was no hope of finding someone. The identifiable remains of 7 astronauts were found on February 2, but the investigation was prolonged because their bodies were simply torn apart. During the investigation, several assumptions were put forward on which the Columbia shuttle collapsed. Suspicions among the people fell on the leadership of NASA and their conspiracy, which occurred for the reason that secret experiments were carried out on the ship according to the presumptions, and in order to hide them, the ship was destroyed. It came to such an extent that doubt fell on Saddam Hussein, because after the crash, the Islamists expressed undisguised joy, calling this crash an act of vengeance. But neither one nor the other reason was possible, because there were no obvious prerequisites for such judgments. Therefore, in the end, everyone came to the conclusion that the carelessness and negligence of the NASA leadership was to blame for everything. They blamed incorrect calculations produced by NASA, the indifference with which they reacted to the breakdown of the ship, and the fall of that piece of polyurethane foam. As with the Challenger spacecraft, NASA's carelessness, a system of error related to the lack of effective risk and safety management mechanisms of the ship, led to the Columbia shuttle disaster. After the disaster, the United States suspended the operation of space shuttles for almost 2 years due to the incompetence of shuttle security systems, increased public distrust of the risk and danger of the space industry, and the high cost of financing. For this reason, NASA decided to take serious measures and reforms related to the quality and safety of the shuttles, for which they spent about $1 billion. Careful measurements were carried out before launches, and all sorts of improvements in the safety of the crew. Nevertheless, when the shuttles returned to the world stage in 2005 on the STS-114 mission of the Discovery shuttle, the flight almost turned out to be fatal. A piece of foam insulation broke off again, but fortunately the wind carried away the breakdown and the crew returned in completely safe. For this reason, it turned out that after all the reforms, modernization which cost $1 billion, the threat of a shuttle crash due to the thermal insulation still remained. The United States eventually stopped using reusable space shuttle crews spacecraft in 2011. Since then, all cargo to the International Space Station has been delivered exclusively on Russian Soyuz rockets. Eventually, this situation shows how destructive people's negligence can be, unwillingness to correct 20-year-old mistakes like with the shuttle's Challenger, and what serious consequences it can lead to. In 2008, the NASA leadership presented to the public an almost completely saved recording of the astronauts' conversations before landing.